Once upon a time, there was a little girl in a noble family whose father loved her very much. Unlike other little girls, she was encouraged to read and learn as much as she could, and one day, when she was 14, he shipped her away to be the emperor's concubine, and she probably never saw him again. Now, to be fair, being the emperor's concubine wasn't like you were a sex slave or anything, more like a live-in maid or secretary whose job also happened to include some shtupping and a contract forbidding outside relationships, and you may not have been forced, depending on the emperor, just pressured into it at an age below that of consent. It's a subtle difference. But seeing as the emperor had 121 other women to fool around with, it's perhaps not too surprising that the two didn't spend much time together, save that one anecdote about Miss Wu telling him how to break a horse. But she did get to know the emperor's son very well. So well, in fact, that once the emperor was counting worms and she was told to get thee to a nunnery, the new emperor Gaozong rode out to find her and brought her right back to the palace. She was sort of like a stepmom to him, but if the emperor's into it, who's gonna stop him? And here's where the real fun starts. At the start of his reign, Gaozong was frequently too sick to do his job, which he wasn't too good at to begin with, meaning whoever whispered the most sweet nothings into his ear had a pretty good chance at passing along some words to the empire. At first, that was his wife and his favorite consort, but, well, that didn't last long. Consort Xiao seems to have simply fallen out of favor, but it's a lot harder to take the place of the empress. But Wu may or may not have had a plan. It's complicated. One night, while Wu and Gaozong's baby daughter was sleeping, someone noticed she was being awfully quiet, and, yeah, they didn't have a baby daughter anymore. Now, some say this was a ruthless tactic by Wu to blame the empress and take her position. Others say the empress actually did it out of jealousy. And others say that using coal to heat a room with no ventilation is a bad idea. The facts of the matter are that the baby died of asphyxiation and Empress Wang took the fall. Gaozong's ministers weren't too happy with the idea of giving her the boot, but one of them eventually gave I mean, it's your family, do whatever, I guess. And with the utmost conviction, the emperor deposed his wife and his former favorite consort for some reason and demoted everyone who openly said it was a bad idea. And again, we hit a questionably hardcore story where Wu Zhao, as she was called at the time, locked her former rivals in a dark room, cut off their hands and feet, sealed them in wine jars, decapitated their corpses, and changed their entire family's surnames. Or maybe she didn't, who knows? What we do know is that Emperor Gaozong got sicker, and while Wu's opponents were able to stop her from being named regent, they couldn't stop her rise to power. About 10 years into her tenure as empress, she was literally running the empire from behind the curtain. People tried to stop her, mind you. There were all kinds of machinations going on in that court, but they ended with a lot of dead officials and/or relatives. Oddly enough, the one person she seemingly hasn't been accused of killing is her husband. So even though he'd been in declining health for years, I feel it is my duty to suggest that his sickness was actually planned all along. I'm only kidding, of course, she's been accused of that too. So, now in need of a young, malleable new emperor, Wu Zhao turned to the crown prince, who was thoroughly dead because she'd implicated him in a conspiracy to depose her, and his own father ordered him to commit suicide. Fine by her, he wasn't her kid anyway. So she turned to her oldest— no, he was poisoned 10 years ago after being nice to her rival's daughters. Her second oldest— nope, exiled then forced suicide. Her third oldest son to be the new face of the empire. A perfect, suggestible, obedient pawn. Unfortunately, he was too suggestible and obedient because not only did he take orders from his mother, he also took orders from his wife and even his wet nurse. At age 30. Unsurprisingly, he didn't sit on the throne very long until his mom had her generals physically pull him off of it, place him under arrest, and ship him off to exile. She then replaced him with her fourth son, to whom she didn't even pretend to give any power. He wasn't allowed in the emperor's quarters, wasn't allowed to talk to his officials, she didn't even bother with the curtain anymore, just whispered in his ear and he gave the order. Pretty soon she got tired of the charade, and Ruizong didn't want to wait until he did something to tick her off, so she decided, here, let me just— there we go, new emperor in town, and gave herself the name Wu Zetian. She wasn't half bad either. Even historians with a bone to pick had to admit she was a pretty good judge of talent within the court, and she took China's imperial exam system, basically an SAT or LSAT, but for nobles working in the government, and opened it up to everybody. Not that peasants had the time or money to study for it, but it's the thought that counts. She promoted Buddhism at the expense of Taoism, but didn't go all death to the Huguenots on anybody, so it's fine. Don't think the bloodshed was over, though. Zetian eventually got the better of the Tibetan Empire, suppressed some rebellions, ruled with the terror of secret police, nearly killed her youngest son. Oh, and she rebuilt this nice pagoda. But alas, torture, murder, fun time couldn't last forever, and Wu Zetian fell from power in nearly the most ironic way possible. Several years into her reign, as she was passing 70, her daughter introduced her to a dashing young gentleman who quickly became her lover. He, in turn, introduced her to his brother. How he knew of his brother's skills as a paramour remains unknown, but again, if the Emperor's into it. Time passed, Wu Zetian's health began to decline, and like a Sith Lord being usurped by his apprentice, these two are now the only ones allowed to see her, despite numerous attempts by court officials to get them demoted, which backfired in the accusers' deaths. It was only a few months before she died that a group of officials got together and said, "Oh no, I see where this is going," killed the two brothers, and gave the empire back to the demonstrably capable Zhongzong. As mentioned, Wu Zetian died a few months later and was buried along with some of the children and grandchildren who so graciously killed themselves for her. As was tradition, a monument was raised which listed all of her accomplishments, and it was blank. Yeah, already historians didn't like her because of all the murder and X chromosomes, so they wrote nasty, sometimes made up things about her, so future historians liked her even less. Just a vicious cycle, really. And the real victims are the modern historians deprived of reliable sources. Hello, thanks for watching. If you want to know what happens next, this video was originally uploaded over on Overly Sarcastic Productions within a larger video on medieval Chinese history, so if you're curious, I highly recommend you check it out. And thank you to all 10,000 of you who subscribed. That is an unfathomable number of people. I should do something to celebrate, but I probably won't. Okay, see you next time.